friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SHIP.
That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
Your freedom.
the Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff, and you're listening to SchiffRadio.com. Anyway, a lot to talk about today. We got the debates last night. We got the president addressing a joint session of Congress this evening just before the NFL season officially kicks in later on tonight. And, of course, we'll start off with what's going on in the markets. New record high in gold and silver stocks today. The Huey Index, we've been talking about it. It's up 13.5 points now. The high that it hit earlier this morning, and we're not much far off the highs right now, was 638, new record high. Among the notable names making 52-week highs, Barrick Gold, Goldcorp, Newmont Mining, Franco-Nevada, all on the 52-week high list. The metal itself, I'm looking at the GLD up $38, silver, SLV ETF up the equivalent of 80 cents. You know, somebody emailed me yesterday saying that I was misleading people when I said that GLD was down $70. And he said, well, gold's not down $70, so you're misleading people. First of all, gold is really like a 24-hour market. But usually when people talk about the gold price, they're looking at the COMEX. And the COMEX closes hours before GLD, which closes at 4. I think the COMEX closes around 1:30, if I'm not mistaken on that. So if you have a big rally in gold that happens after the COMEX close, then obviously you can have a bigger decline in GLD than is shown for the COMEX on that day. But it's all has to do with when the individual markets open and close. But for all practical purposes, there is a 24-hour market in gold. It's traded constantly around the clock. So when I'm talking about where gold is on the GLD, it's relative to where gold was, at 4 o'clock Eastern time the previous day. And so it's all, it really doesn't matter as long as you're consistent in which one you talk about. And I'm just using that ETF because it's right there on my screen with all the stocks, and I get the live quote, so it's easier for me to say it that way. But it's moving up. It's not at a record high yet, but the gold stocks continue to outperform. And here we have, the gold index is up 2% today. Actually, gold is up 2% itself, so they're just bang on the same percentage. One of the catalysts, I think, today for the rise in the price of gold, although gold prices, I think, were up before the announcement from the Norwegian central bank, basically when Switzerland joined the currency war and decided to shoot their own citizens, money was flowing into Norwegian krona. The krona hit a 9-year high against the euro the other day, and apparently now they've made some noise saying that if the currency keeps going up, they're prepared to cut rates to lessen the appeal of the krona. Again, the irresponsible, reckless monetary policy infecting all nations around the world. Now, at least the Norwegians, to their credit, said they would not adopt the Swiss measures. They're not going to peg the krona to the euro. I guess they're not that stupid. But they are trying to throw cold water on the appeal of the Norwegian currency, which is a currency that I've favored for a long time as a way to play Europe. We have a lot of exposure. I advocate that investors have exposure to Europe, but most of my exposure has been in either Switzerland or Scandinavia, not just Norway, but Sweden as well. And I have been a fan of those currencies. But when central banks talk about, well, we're going to try to lessen the appeal of our currency by creating some more inflation, well, that simply fuels the global demand for gold because that's one monetary asset that you don't have to worry about that. Is it possible that there could be a coordinated effort by central banks to try to dump their gold to get the price of gold down? I don't think so. And you don't have all the political pressure that you do with currency. So I think it is the last safe haven standing, and I think as a result, more and more money from all corners of the globe will be flowing into gold, and maybe some of the investors are starting to finally understand and comprehend what is going on with gold, how the fundamentals have so changed in favor of gold, and maybe that's why we're finally starting to see a breakout in the gold stocks. Anyway, also some news this morning on the rate front. The European Central Bank decided to leave interest rates at 1.5%. Again, I believe that the rates are too low. They've gotten criticism from the Keynesians for raising rates. The fact of the matter is that was the right thing they did. The problem was they didn't raise them enough, and now they stopped raising them. Bank of England, similar, leaving rates unchanged at 0.5%. Of course, even 0.5% is higher than the rates that we have in the United States. But again, all of these countries keeping their rates near rock bottom, which is just going to throw fuel on the gold bullion fire. Also got some economic data today. Unemployment claims unexpectedly increased. What else is new? Unemployment claims going up. On the good news, though, that the trade deficit for July actually contracted a little bit more than was estimated, mainly, though, because of a decline in the price of crude oil, which I believe is only temporary. In fact, crude oil is looking very, very strong right now, trading above $89 a barrel. Also, on a negative note, the trade deficit with China continues to expand. And that's despite the fact that the RMB has been rising in value, showing that obviously simply, that increase in the currency is not nearly enough to lessen the appeal of Chinese goods. And in fact, it shows that much greater appreciation is not only necessary but inevitable, I believe, with the Chinese RMB. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the debates. Certainly, if anybody watches debates, I'd like to get some calls on the debates. By the way, Ron Paul's son, Rand Paul, will be a guest on the show today. He's coming up at 11 o'clock. Unfortunately, he's got a busy schedule, so he can only be on for one segment, so make sure to stick around for that. We'll get his take on his father's performance and a preview of maybe what he expects from Obama later this evening. But let's go on to the debate. I mean, first of all, what frustrated me about the debate was how long I had to wait before Ron Paul got a chance to speak. I mean, he was the last candidate to receive a question, despite the fact that going into the debate, he's in third place. You know, you figured he's in last place, given the fact that they got to him last, because they started off with the two front runners, Romney and Perry. So you would figure they were questioning people in the order of where they stand in the polls, but of course they decided to call on Ron Paul last, maybe to create the impression that he's last in the polls, which is obviously not the case. But I certainly think the highlight of the debate for most people was the interchange between Romney and Perry, and the question is who got the better of it. I mean, I happen to think that Romney is a good debater. I think makes a good presence. He's charismatic, and I really like the way he criticizes Obama. I think he really makes it look like Obama is just in way over his head. He doesn't understand what's going on, and I think that's a good message, because obviously his experience in the private sector is far more relevant than Obama's experience as a community organizer and bureaucrat. So I like that dynamic, although I don't agree with everything that Romney says. Specifically, the big debate was Romney and Perry on Social Security. And there, I have a lot more respect for Rick Perry for having the courage to stick to his guns and say that Social Security is a fraud, that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, which, of course, it is. Anyway, I'm going to continue talking about the debates and taking some of your phone calls when we come back, so stick around. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America,
We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
We are back talking about the Republican debates last night at the Reagan Library and the feud between Rick Perry and Romney, Mitt Romney, over Social Security. And Rick Perry basically correctly calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme and a fraud, and Romney, basically denying that truth and trying to position himself as the defender of Social Security, which politically is usually the right thing to do. Of course, it shows you that he's not a man of principle. He's a pragmatic politician looking to appease voters, which lets you think that, as president, even if he's able to win, who knows if he's going to do anything that would actually help the country. But to get into Social Security, of course it's a Ponzi scheme. What a Ponzi scheme means is that the current beneficiaries rely on the contributions from current taxpayers, and current taxpayers are hoping to receive their benefits from the taxes levied on future Social Security workers who would be paying taxes in the future. So that pay-as-you-go function is precisely what a Ponzi scheme means, as opposed to a genuine retirement plan that is funded based on investing the money that is collected and paying future beneficiaries from their own contributions and the returns that are earned on them. We don't have a funded system. We don't have a pension in the true sense of a word. We are doing exactly what Ponzi did. The only difference really between a Ponzi scheme and Social Security is that a Ponzi scheme is voluntary. Once you figure out it's a Ponzi scheme, you could drop out. But Social Security, even if you know it's a Ponzi scheme, the government requires you to take part, which is why the Ponzi scheme has gone on for as long as it has, because the people who figure it out can't opt out. If the government had required all of Bernie Madoff's clients to stay in his program, he'd still be running his business today. So that's the only real business difference. But, Romney, in trying to defend Social Security and invoke the name of Ronald Reagan, which is always a good thing to do in the Republican Party, especially in his library, talked about how Ronald Reagan saved Social Security and how he wants to do the same thing. Well, I wish they would have discussed how Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill saved Social Security in 1983. I'll tell you how he saved it, with a massive tax increase. So is that really what Romney wants, a massive tax increase? Of course not. Well, then how is he going to save Social Security the way Reagan did without having a massive tax increase? What did they do? They raised the payroll tax immediately. In the first year after 83, the payroll tax went from 10.8% to 11.4%, but it kept on going up. It just was going up in gradual steps. They also increased the amount of income subject to the tax from $32.4 thousand to $37.8 thousand in 1 year. That was a 16.6% increase in the amount of income subject to tax. So basically, payroll taxes were raised in the first year by over 20% on Social Security taxpayers. That was a significant increase. And then, of course, it kept going up higher and higher. The now $106,800 is subject to Social Security taxes, thanks in large part to the way Ronald Reagan saved the system with a massive tax hike. But he also, this was the biggest tax hike of the system. Remember that when Social Security was first enacted, people who were self-employed weren't even part of it, so they didn't pay any taxes. Because the idea was, hey, if you're smart enough to be self-employed, you're smart enough to save for your own retirement. But as the Ponzi scheme was running out of money, eventually they applied the Social Security tax to the self-employed, but they only had to pay half. They didn't pay both portions. Well, that changed in 1983. Ronald Reagan tax increase made the self-employed pay both portions of the payroll tax. So in effect, if you combine the Medicare and the Social Security tax, the Reagan tax hike increased the self-employment tax from 6.8% to 14%. That was a 106% increase in the tax on the self-employed. Is that what Romney wants? Does he want to pretty much double the taxes on the self-employed like Ronald Reagan did? And in fact, it was worse than that because of the increase in the amount of income that was subject to tax. So the real effective rate of tax increase under that plan to save Social Security on self-employed individuals was 140% tax hike immediately in the next year. And, of course, it got worse over time. So does Romney want to increase taxes by 140% on the self-employed like Ronald Reagan to save Social Security? Now, what else did Ronald Reagan do to save Social Security? They imposed for the first time income taxes on Social Security benefits. They subjected half of Social Security benefits to income taxes for higher earning individuals, which in effect was a means testing and a reduction of benefits. Well, Romney said, and even Rick Perry said that people who are currently on Social Security, they have nothing to worry about. They're not going to have any cuts. Well, Ronald Reagan cut Social Security benefits for upper income people. That's what he did to save Social Security. So do they want to do that? Is anyone going to come up there and say, they all want to say, let's save Social Security like Ronald Reagan. How did he save it? Big increases in taxes and cuts in benefits. Where's that? Who's going to say that? And, of course, did Ronald Reagan save Social Security? Of course not. He didn't save it. He made it into a bigger mess because all he did is allow the program to get bigger and bigger, allow more people to come into the Ponzi scheme, and so the ultimate losses to America because of Social Security, because of this gigantic fraud, are now going to be much bigger because Ronald Reagan, quote-unquote, saved it. Had Ronald Reagan done the right thing, he would have abolished it back then and replaced it with something that actually works. That might have been the time to do the Chilean system, which, of course, was brought up in the debates by Herman Cain. I think it's too late. I think the problem is now too big. That's what we should have done. We should have done the Chilean example. We should have privatized it back in 1983 when we figured out that it didn't work. That would have saved it. But we didn't do that. We just made the Ponzi scheme bigger. We added more chain to the chain letter. And now we are in a much bigger mess. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit, too, about Ron Paul in particular. I mean, how do I think he did? I don't know. I always like him, so I'm biased. But I try to figure out what the average Republican voter would have thought about Ron Paul. And, I don't think he did a bad job. But I don't know that he picked up a lot of extra support. I don't think he lost any support. But he really needs to start making bigger dents in Romney and in Perry, and I don't know that he accomplished that in the debate. I mean, again, I said I think that from to a typical Republican voter, I think that Romney won the debate. Although I don't think Perry did a bad job. But anyway, I want to get back after the break. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the specific issues that Ron Paul spoke about, such as FEMA, such as immigration and the border fence and health care and Ronald Reagan. So don't go away. We're going to be right back and discuss the debates. And, again, if you want to call 855-4-SHIF, 855-4-SHIF, Rand Paul, my guest, is not coming up for another half hour. So stick around. There's more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up.
Show. We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SHIF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Radio.
The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. Before I continue my discussion of these debates, I just on the break was taking a look at, Newmont Mining. And again, I am not allowed to give investment recommendations. So I'm mentioning the stock, and unfortunately, I can't give any recommendations. So whenever I mention the stock, it's not you can't take it as a recommendation. I'm just talking about what's going on. And I noticed that the stock is finally at an all-time record high today. This is the first time, really, it's eclipsed the high that it made back in January of 2006. But to give you an idea of the underperformance of gold stocks versus gold, and, of course, Newmont Mining is a premier gold company. It's the only gold company that is in the S&P 500, the lone company there. So it is now back to the level, or maybe slightly, because the high in January of 2006, the stock got up to 61. Looks like the high was 62.72. And so now we're at 65.73. So we're a couple of points higher. Actually, we did manage to break that record also back in September of 2010. But we're now higher than that September. That high was 65.50. But back when Newmont Mining was at 62.72, back in January of 06, gold was less than $550 an ounce. I mean, the price of gold has more than tripled since then. And basically, Newmont Mining is barely unchanged during that period of time. So somebody who had the foresight to think that gold was going to go up from $530 an ounce back in 2006, and who bought Newmont Mining, you can do the same trade today, even though gold is at $1,800, and you can basically pay about the same price as the guy that figured it out all the way back in 2006. So how long is that gift horse opportunity going to stay here, which in my opinion is what it is. So I think people are starting to figure out that they caught a lucky break. And they can be buying a lot of these stocks. Again, I'm not recommending any stock in particular. And of course, before you buy any stock, particularly a gold stock, hey, make sure you understand the risks and make sure it is suitable. But anyway, back to the discussion. So the Reagan tax hikes were enormous to save Social Security, and it would be interesting to see how many candidates would actually embrace the details of what Ronald Reagan did. And are they willing to do it again? Because right now we're doing the opposite. Remember, as part of Obama's plan to stimulate the economy, they cut the payroll tax, cut it. So in other words, they made Social Security even less solvent by diminishing the revenue that feeds it, that supports it. And, of course, I think when he speaks tonight, he's going to recommend further cuts. So that's exactly the opposite of what Reagan did when Social Security was in trouble in the past. And, of course, it is in even more trouble now than it was back then, in large part thanks to what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did to, quote-unquote, save Social Security. But anyway, getting to some of the other issues that Ron Paul talked about, one being FEMA, and, of course, what I would have loved him to have said in his opposition to FEMA, because he was asked, well, the announcer, the moderator said, well, what are the states going to do? What's going to happen if there's a natural disaster and there's no FEMA? How are we going to pay to rebuild things? I would have liked to have said, and he did rightly point out that we didn't even have FEMA until 1979. But what he should have said was, well, wait a minute. Where do you think the federal government gets the money? It gets it from the states. So if we didn't have FEMA, then the government wouldn't have to tax us as much, and so the states would have money to pay for their own projects. But the problem with FEMA is the moral hazard. The governor of my state here, Malloy, actually called Ron Paul an idiot for opposing FEMA. The idiot is our own governor, because Connecticut loses based on FEMA. Yes, we finally had a hurricane. We finally are a natural disaster, and we're finally going to get a tiny bit of money back from FEMA. But if you look at over the years, all the taxes that people in Connecticut pay to bail out other states that are in hurricane zones more often, we're a huge loser based on the FEMA program. We should get the government out of disaster relief and let the states handle it on their own. And if the states knew that they were responsible for their own disasters, then they would be more responsible with their own building, and people would respond to market forces. Instead, we have a moral hazard, and no matter how often houses are destroyed by floods, they just keep rebuilding in the same area because they know the federal government is going to pay the cost. If the federal government wasn't there, we wouldn't have as many houses in flood zones. People would build our houses in areas that are less likely to be flooded. And in fact, I read an article, it was a good article here in a local paper, that pointed out that the number of natural disasters, areas that are declared, always shoots up dramatically in election years, because what happens is politicians use FEMA to try to win the support of voters in certain areas by handing out money. And so the declaration of a disaster area is really dependent on politicians wanting to get reelected. And so the closer they are to an election, the more likely they are to try to buy votes using FEMA. So Ron Paul is right. We ought to get rid of FEMA. In fact, he also used a line that I used, and it shows that, great minds think alike. When I ran for Senate, every time I got a question about the border fence, I always said, hey, the real problem with that border fence is I'm afraid that one day it's not going to be used to keep the Mexicans out. It's going to be used to keep the Americans in. And Ron Paul made that same point. But unfortunately, I think it was lost on a lot of people. So I think maybe people are going to say he's kind of kooky for making that point because he didn't get to preference why. He didn't get to talk about the fact that we're really on the verge of a major economic collapse that's going to be so bad that a lot of people are going to want to leave. And the government might try to stop that from happening because, after all, it can't tax us if we leave. And so if they want to try to continue to keep the Ponzi scheme going of Social Security, they need the young people here and working so they can tax them. And if they try to get out of the country, they can't tax them. And so it very well may be that we do end up using that fence to keep people in. But also there was a little bit of a debate, and I alluded to it yesterday, that it would come up. Ron Paul's criticism of Ronald Reagan, which, of course, was very warranted. I know a lot of people, like to talk fondly of Ronald Reagan. I liked him. He was a great guy. Of all the presidents of my lifetime, I still think he was the best. The problem was he was the best of a very bad bunch. It's a really low bar. But we have to be honest that government spending rose fast under the Reagan administration. The deficits rose rapidly. Government expanded. And obviously, that's not what Ronald Reagan wanted, but unfortunately, that is what happened. Despite Ronald Reagan's philosophical agreement that we needed small government and sound money, he ran on abolishing the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. But unfortunately, it never happened. And so we have to be honest about the difference between the Reagan record and, Reagan himself and what he stood for. He stood for all the right things, and Ron Paul was correct to support him. But his decision to leave the Republican Party out of frustration and disgust, I think, was well reserved, was deserved, because we didn't achieve those goals under Ronald Reagan. Despite the fact that he championed those goals, we failed to achieve them. And will we achieve them next time? Maybe, but we need somebody with enough integrity like Ron Paul to be honest. But unfortunately, honesty is something that is not a good quality in a politician. It is very difficult to get elected being honest, because what the public wants is you to spoon feed them a bunch of nonsense. Tell them that the government is going to make everything better, that there's nothing to worry about. Hey, you're always popular when you're giving out a free lunch. When you're trying to explain that it's not a free lunch, you're trying to explain how expensive it is, hey, you're not as popular. Anyway, let me try to take a couple of calls. First up is Greg calling from Wilmington, Delaware. Greg, you're on.
Good morning. Feeling like Ron Paul sitting here a half hour waiting to speak.
I think the most frustrating. Let me just interrupt you real quick because I just thought of this. The most frustrating.
Ron Paul.
The most frustrating part was that they asked everybody a question about health care except Ron Paul, and then Ron Paul finally gets to say, "Hey, wait a minute! You're talking about health care. I'm the only guy up here who's actually a physician. I'm a medical doctor. Why not ask me something about health care?"
Yeah, one of the most fascinating parts about the debate is it's funny because obviously MSNBC is, very liberal, and to me it looked like they were trying to promote, create another, McCain, so that they would have the two weakest candidates, but sort of populist candidates win the day. And they didn't want anything to do with Ron Paul.
Yeah, I know. And I was, I thought it was going to be on NBC. I didn't even realize it would be on MSNBC. So I don't even know if the Republicans know where MSNBC is on their dial. I can't even know how often they watch it. But at least, Ron Paul's commercial was there after the debate in the post coverage, which I watched, and to look at all these liberals. I mean, it was a great group of ultra liberal commentators, basically trying to review see who won, which is kind of like having, I don't know. I mean, maybe I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, is it like having a group of homosexuals judging a female beauty contest? I don't know. I mean, the whole thing looked ridiculous to have. There wasn't a Republican in the group to try to figure out who won the Republican debate.
There is one advantage I think Ron Paul has, and that is it's almost like you're looking at what were there 8 candidates, and 7 of them are all 4-door sedans, and this one is an SUV, like a totally different vehicle than any of the others. So anybody watching that debate, I mean, to me, like Romney, the guy from Utah, I can't even remember their names. That's how little they affect me. They're all the same. You know, they have the same suits on, the same ties, the same answers. At least Ron Paul, you know, somebody, you and I follow this all the time, so we know all about it, but somebody just walking off the street would have to say, wow, that guy's different.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen, I don't think, Michelle Bachmann, I don't know, she didn't look as good in this debate, I didn't think, as some of the previous ones. I think she might lose a little bit fall a little bit further behind. So that'll mean that Ron Paul's third place position, I think, will be a little stronger. And so what is the media going to do then? I guess they're going to have to just focus on the top 2. The top tier will simply be 2 candidates because I don't think they're going to try to put Ron Paul in the top tier the way they did Michelle Bachmann. But anyway, hey, thanks for your observations. Stick around. We got another segment coming up before the man himself, Senator Rand Paul, Ron's father, stops by to say hi. So stick around. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Make no friends.
Was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Anyway, next caller is Mike from Medford, New Jersey. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I was calling in about the debates last night on MSNBC on their website. They posted a poll, an online poll on who won the debates, and they had just over 128,000 votes. Ron Paul is leading it with 50.1%.
Well, that happens all the time. I know that Ron Paul's supporters are very compassionate and motivated to vote in those polls, and so they often do it. And so the polls do get skewed because Ron Paul supporters are more likely to vote in those polls, even if they didn't watch the debate. Which, although I'm sure a lot of Ron Paul supporters did watch that debate, because that's how motivated they are. But what the media ought to focus on is, why is it that Ron Paul supporters are so passionate and so motivated? Because he's genuine. He actually stands for something. He's a man of principle. Therefore, his supporters are passionate and in their support. The other politicians, no one really cares. I mean, you can't even tell the difference. I mean, yes, you like one over the other because he's not as bad as the other guy, but you don't get the real passion for the candidate. So rather than simply saying, Ron Paul's, supporters are so passionate and dismissing it, the media should really focus on why that is. Because I believe if more people were exposed to Ron Paul, to Ron Paul the man, to his history, to what he's devoted his life to, his philosophy, I think you'd have a lot more supporters, Ron Paul supporters out there, which is why I believe the media doesn't want to cover him, because they're afraid of covering him and giving him more support.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because the media, the liberal media, I mean, they despise everything he stands for. Because he wants free markets. He believes in capitalism. But he doesn't just believe in it. He actually wants to do it. Right? He wants to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. The other Republicans, yeah, they want to talk about small government, but they don't want to cut anything because they're afraid if they do, they won't get elected. Or if they're already in office, they won't get reelected.
Sure, that's their job, get elected and get reelected. That's all they know.
You know, Ron Paul is willing to lose an election on principle. And despite that, he's won a lot of elections in Texas. So, I mean, hey, you know, you can do it. It can be done.
Do you think you'll have anybody on your show that's running for the GOP nomination other than Ron Paul? Or, do you think you get a
Herman Cain? Herman Cain's already been on my show. So Ron Paul has been on my show. Gary Johnson, who's running for president, who unfortunately is not in the debates, has been on my show. You know, we could reach out. I don't know if we already had to some of the, you know, top. I don't know if they the top tier. I don't know if I can get a Romney or a Perry to come on my show. In fact, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if we've reached out to them. I'll let you know because I would certainly like to have all of the Republican candidates on my show if they would be willing to do it.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic because I don't think anybody in the media outlets are going to ask the type of questions that you ask and have a rebuttal.
Which is why they probably won't come on. You know, they're afraid that they might say something that somebody could use against them.
Oh yeah, you'll have them exposed in a matter of moments, and they won't. They'll hang up the phone, or they'll say that line got disconnected.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks for the call. Next up is Mike in Hackensack, New Jersey. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Good morning. I just wanted to touch on something you said earlier about if we left, the government wouldn't be able to tax us, but that's not entirely true because if I remember correctly, we're the only country on the planet that taxes citizens no matter where they live, even if they try to.
But that tax doesn't apply to Social Security. So if you're an American citizen and you're living abroad, the taxes that you're required to pay are federal income taxes. You are not required to pay any Social Security taxes. And if you are an American citizen working abroad, even if you maintain your U.S. passport, I don't remember the exact number, but something like the first $80,000 or $90,000 is exempt from federal taxes. So for the typical person, the typical 21, 22, 23-year-old, who, doesn't want to pay Social Security taxes because we jack them up too high or whatever, if he leaves the country, he's not going to be paying those taxes, and he's probably not going to be paying U.S. income taxes either because he's probably not going to earn enough, at that point in his life to be subject. So he will pay the taxes in the country where he goes, which is why anybody fleeing the United States looking for lower taxes will probably try to go to a country where the taxes are lower. In fact, like, for example, the brokers who quit Euro Pacific Capital and who are now working for Euro Pacific International, they have escaped the state income tax that they used to pay. They have escaped the payroll tax that they had to pay, and they are not paying any U.S. income taxes on their first, $90,000. And since where they're living in Anguilla, since there are no income taxes there at all, they're not paying any taxes at all on their first 90-something thousand. And then whatever they earn above that, they're simply paying the federal income tax, and it starts, of course, at the lowest rate. So you save a lot of taxes if you leave the country and work someplace else, specifically if you work in a tax haven. And so I think more people will want to do that in the future, the higher U.S. tax rates rise.
Okay, one last thing. I know this may sound stupid, but as far as the Dow is concerned, when you talk about how high the Dow is or how low is that just a collection of the prices of the shares within it?
Well, the Dow Jones is a weighted index of 30 stocks. That's really all it is. I mean, it's 30 stocks. They're not really industrial anymore because a lot of the stocks that are in there are service sector type stocks because there's not that much industry left, let's be honest. So it's not really – the Dow Jones Industrial Average is probably not the best way to refer to it, just the Dow maybe. But it's just 30 stocks, and it's a weighted basket, and that's all it is. And today, as we speak, that basket is up 44 points. It was earlier. The market opened negative, and so we have since rallied. That has taken some of the luster off the gold and silver rally. But, hey, gold's still up about $33 on the GLD, and silver's still up just under 60 cents. So gold is not collapsing with the stock market rally, but, there has been a little bit of the wind taken out of the sail because now there is money moving into stocks. Anyway, hey, that's it for the first hour. Don't go away. Heading up the next hour, the top of the next hour is Rand Paul, son of presidential candidate Ron Paul and senator, U.S. Senator from Kentucky. Anyway, stick around. This is the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on. Call in now. 855-4-SHIP. That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. And joining me now from Washington, D.C., Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. Rand, of course, is the son of Ron Paul, congressman, presidential candidate. Rand, thanks for stopping by.
Hey, Peter. Good to be with you.
Hey, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods on Tuesday. I'm actually going to be testifying in front of Congress on how to create jobs. So they're about to get a real earful. I don't know if they're expecting somebody like me to talk to them. But anyway, let me get your take, first of all, on last night's debates. What did you think of the candidates, and in particular, how do you think your dad did?
Well, I think my dad did great, but, I'm kind of biased in that sense. And so, no, I think my dad's been really mixing it up well. And over the last week or so, got a lot of attention by putting out that ad that talks about Rick Perry's previous support for Al Gore. And I think a lot of people, it's easy now for people to say they're a conservative, but you got to wonder, when they were supporting Al Gore just a few years ago.
Yeah, I really like that ad, too. But as far as the other candidates, other than your dad, who do you think came in second?
Well, I think all of them did pretty well. And the interesting thing is that when you poll now a generic Republican against Obama, any Republican is beating Obama, which shows you really, how bad things are.
Yeah, well, and they're going to get a lot worse. I guess that's the good news for the Republican nominee by the time the election comes around. Well, so what about tonight? First of all, are you going to be attending the president's address tonight, or you got other plans?
I will be attending the president's address and kind of hoping that he's got something new that he's going to actually present. But so far what I've heard is just the tired old, government stimulus kind of talk that he has tried before and hasn't worked.
So since it hasn't worked in the past, they decided to do it again, I guess.
You know what they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I really, it's the same old, same old. It's going to be infrastructure spending, but he really never acknowledges that, 40 cents on every dollar is being borrowed. And you just can't run a country that way. And it makes no sense really to try to stimulate with either borrowed money or printed money.
Yeah, what people don't seem to understand, because, of course, I think that he's going to talk about cutting taxes and increasing government spending to stimulate the economy. But what about the drag on the economy from the debt that is going to be necessary to finance all that spending? I actually think that bigger deficits or more money printing, more inflation, actually does more to destroy jobs than whatever benefit you might get from the extra money in spending.
Well, there are some economists who are now saying that the debt load that we're bearing as a country is costing us about 1 million jobs a year. Some people say it costs us probably as much as 1 percentage point in growth. of the economy a year. So there are a lot of repercussions. There are repercussions for the working class every time they go to the store, and gas prices have doubled, food prices are rising in double digits. So really there are repercussions to debt. We just need to do a better job of explaining to folks why big government causes higher prices at the gas station.
Yeah, and in fact, you're looking at it today. I mean, oil prices are back above $90 a barrel, and it's happening because of inflation. Whatever the government is doing to prop up the stock market and the housing market, that's what's also causing oil prices to go up and food prices to go up. But nobody really explains it in those terms.
Well, the interesting thing is that the working class and senior citizens, which have often gravitated to the Democrat Party, really they should be coming our way, because it's the debt that causes the inflation that hurts the working class and those on fixed income the most. And it's that financing of the debt, that printing of the new paper currency, that causes your prices to rise. And I think they're coming around, and folks are coming around because the idea that you can borrow $40,000 a second is just mind-boggling.
And that would be a great issue for your dad to focus on, because, people want to attack him on a Social Security or something like that. What's really destroying the retired people and the elderly is 0% interest rates, is the increase in the cost of living. That is destroying much more of their purchasing power. Even if we, had a, sensible monetary policy and we had a means testing of Social Security, a lot of the people who are having their Social Security benefits reduced would be much better off, because they would have a decent rate of return on their CDs, and they wouldn't be watching the cost of living rise the way it is.
Yeah, and the thing is one of the president's ideas for job creation is to reduce the payroll tax. Social Security now pays out more than it brings in, so what he's going to do is reduce those even further who are paying in, which really makes the system further and further into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And it's a temporary fix.
Yeah, I pointed this out on my show, but you had Mitt Romney praising the way Ronald Reagan saved Social Security. Well, the way he did it was a massive increase in Social Security taxes, and he reduced benefits. I mean, so all the Republicans are saying they don't want to raise taxes. So then how can we save Social Security the way Ronald Reagan did it without a massive increase in the payroll tax?
Yeah, the only way Social Security really ultimately can be fixed, or that people can save for their retirement, is by allowing them to save privately and encouraging the development of private savings accounts. And we do have sort of a two-tiered market. We have any of those who are working and have the availability of a 401k, I think, are using it. And the young people, when you ask them about Social Security, really don't expect it to be there, and they would love to opt out.
Well, I know, but the problem is, how do they opt out? Because they're supporting the current generation. That's why Rick Perry is right, that it is a Ponzi scheme.
Right, and that's the real problem. That's the real rub, and that's the difficulty in going to a private system or letting young people opt out, is that the system is already so top-heavy and gets enormously more top-heavy if we let the young folks opt out.
That's what we should have done back in 1983. Instead of saving a broken system, we should have adopted a Chilean model back then. But I want to ask you one question about the media coverage of your dad, because now he seems to be getting some coverage because of his lack of coverage. And you when you ran, I mean, your positions are not too far off from your father's. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. Not only did you win a Republican primary, you're a U.S. senator. So if you could win, why does everybody just assume that Ron Paul can't?
Well, some of the headlines after Iowa, when he basically tied Bachmann, it was virtually a statistical tie. The headlines were almost hilarious if they weren't so tragic. The headline said, Bachmann wins, Pawlenty gets third, Santorum surging. So you get all these ridiculous headlines completely ignoring him. But then when Jon Stewart came out with his parody of that, I think a lot of the media watched Jon Stewart, and they felt a little bit like, he's exactly right. We have done a disservice here. And then there was a little bit of a backlash, and he got more coverage.
But even that, I was watching ABC News last night and over the weekend, and they would show the top tier, and they had the percentages, and they would cite polls, and they showed three pictures, Michelle Bachmann, even though Michelle Bachmann was polling lower than your dad in all the polls they were referencing, yet they didn't even mention him, and they went right to the fourth place person, assuming that she was in third.
Yeah, and they create their own perception by doing that, and those who write about it being a two-person race now try to create a perception of that. But I think we've come a long way from 2007, 2008 in the sense that, Ron Paul now has almost universal name recognition. His numbers are a pretty solid double digits everywhere. And so really, we'd just like one more candidate to get in the race. Every time a candidate gets in the race, we dilute the rest of the vote.
Yeah, no one is going to take any of the Ron Paul supporters. They are diehards. So, yeah, and I said this too. As soon as Perry got in, he took a lot of the wind out of what's her name, Bachman's sails.
Bachman, yeah.
Yeah, and that when that happened on the day of Ames, I said immediately, why aren't they just focusing on Ron? Because now that if he was in the race at the time of Iowa, your dad would have won because he would have taken a lot of support from Bachman, and Ron would have won Ames.
I think you're probably right. And but one of the good things that I think is making us more relevant is that we're engaging with some of the other candidates. And the fact that, both my father and Rick Perry are from Texas, them mixing it up and my father pointing out some of the things, and Perry really actually responding in the debate to some of the charges, I think shows that he's got some sensitivity on some of these issues, particularly the Al Gore issue, because there aren't many conservative Republicans who really see Al Gore as someone they could have ever supported, even as recently as, 1988.
Yeah, well, and I think he's more than just – I think he's really setting the agenda. I think a lot of the other candidates are adopting a lot of Ron Paul's talking points. I think he has had a lot of influence on this race, a lot more than a lot of people give him credit. I think that a lot of people are trying to reach out to Tea Party supporters by copying Ron.
Well, look at, the comment by Rick Perry, who said that he wasn't in favor of military adventurism. Now, he kind of backed away from the statement and never fully explained it last night, but it is a statement that comes right out of Ron Paul playbook, talking about that we're in too many places around the world. You've had Michelle Bachmann also saying that we shouldn't go to war without congressional authority like we're doing in Libya. So you really have people, and then you've got, we won't even mention his name because he's inconsequential, but the guy on the far left-hand part of the stage that used to be a senator from Pennsylvania saying, all the Republican Party's becoming isolationist. And I tell you what he needs to understand is that the Republican Party is now having a healthy debate about foreign policy, and I think Ron Paul's really responsible for that.
Yeah, and I think he's winning that ideological battle. We actually have to win the legislative battle. We have to actually do what Ronald Reagan failed to do, and that's actually cut government spending. It's not enough to be in favor of small government. We need to actually achieve it, and I'm hoping that if Ron Paul becomes president, and if anybody deserves to be president, it's your father, that he'll actually succeed where Ronald Reagan failed. But anyway, hey, Rand, thanks for stopping by. I know you got to run, so you can't stick around for the next segment. Everybody else, we got a lot more coming up here on the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America.
We're sorry.
Peter Schiff is back on the air.
And we are back. This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com. It's great to have Senator Rand Paul on the show. Again, hopefully I can maybe meet up with the senator in Washington when I'm there on Tuesday. In fact, we're going to be doing the Peter Schiff Show that Monday from the Radio America studios down in Washington, D.C. On Tuesday, I will not be able to do the show. I'm going to be testifying. So we have a guest host who will be filling in on Tuesday. So it will be a good show. It is, I'm always bad with names when I'm trying to. It'll come to me in a minute. Tom Woods is going to be guest hosting. He's a great guy. Love listening to Tom Woods. Has a great sense of humor and really understands the economy. He's guest hosted the show before. Hey, by the way, also got some announcements for later today. I've got 2 television appearances. If you're interested in watching. For our Canadian fans, I will be on CTV this evening at 6 p.m., and then I will be on television on Fox Business on Lou Dobbs at 8 p.m. following President Obama's speech on job creation. So no doubt Lou and I will be discussing my reaction to President Obama's speech. So that should be an interesting interview. 8 p.m. this evening. Of course, I am talking Eastern times, both for the 6 p.m. CTV hit and the Fox Business 8 p.m. hit. Both, of course, I will be doing both those interviews from the studio right here at the in my house here where I do the radio show. Anyway, let me go back to the telephones. On hold is Cole calling from California. Cole, welcome to the show.
Good day, sir. Thanks for taking my call. I just thought it'd be relevant to mention that I heard from reliable sources that MSNBC got a government bailout.
They did. Well, I guess, NBC is owned by GE, and GE got a government bailout. I mean, I think without the financial bailout, GE might have actually failed. I used to call GE a hedge fund masquerading as a company. And, of course, Warren Buffett got bailed out because he made a big investment in GE, prior to the collapse there. But anyway, was that your point, or did you have another question?
Well, that's, also McDonald's got a bailout. Just utter ridiculousness.
I can't imagine they actually needed one, but I guess they were handing out money to so many different people that, the people just lined up. Of course, I wasn't getting bailed out by the government. I was getting fined. So it was the companies that were laying people off and losing a bunch of money, got paid. Whereas, I was trying to hire people and I got fined for it. But anyway, so,
thanks for taking my call.
Sure, thanks for calling. Anyway, next up, calling from Moscow, Russia. I'm not sure if we've had any calls from Russia yet, but is it Alex or Alexa?
Well, it doesn't matter. Hello, Peter. Okay.
Well, good. Yes, I hear you loud and clear.
Okay, my name is Alexei. I'm not American. I'm Russian. My first language is Russian, and it seems like your word reached Russia. And so I'm following you for a few years now, and I have a question for you and a few points, if you wish.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so my first point is that I purchased your book, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, from the Amazon with delivery to Moscow, Russia. And it's an amazing book. I really appreciate your effort writing it. And my question is, how do we have some strong evidence that Austrian approach is working? Because right now, everybody tries to adopt some Keynesian approach, and people can have an evidence that Keynesians are not are pushing some non-working solutions. But how do we have some very clear evidence that Austrian people are getting it right?
Well, I think we have a lot of evidence because, first of all, it was the Austrians that accurately predicted the events of 2008, 2009. The Austrians, myself included, understood the dynamics of the credit bubble, of the housing boom. They knew that when it would bust, it would be bad. And we also knew that the government would repeat the mistakes that created it. Remember, if you go and even read my original book, Crash Proof, not only did I write about what was going to happen, but I wrote about the government's response. I understood that they were going to try to stimulate, reflate, prop up the housing market, that they were going to slash interest rates, print money, and I said it wouldn't work, and it's not working, And of course, the politicians, the Keynesians, rather than accepting the fact that Keynesianism is wrong, they have, cognitive dissonance won't allow that. So no matter how much worse the economy gets as a result of Keynesian stimulus, they will continue to stimulate more because they're convinced that that's the only way out. And you have guys like a Paul Krugman who will simply convince themselves that the only reason that the stimulus doesn't work is because it's too small. And if it was only bigger, it would work. But, of course, no matter how big it is, you can always argue that it should have been bigger. And, of course, but increasing the size of the poison is not going to cure the economy. We have to stop administering it. And I think that there's evidence all around the world. And, in fact, if you look at the countries that are closest to an Austrian model were further away from, that do less Keynesianism, the countries that did less stimulus are doing better than the countries that did more. Anyway, hey, we're running out of time. If you have a couple more questions, you want to stick around, feel free. You're calling all the way from Russia. It's the least I can do is keep you over the break. Anyway, you're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Red Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back, and we're talking with Alexia from Moscow. And did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, Peter, when I look at the Russian stock market, it's extremely sensitive to some news from Europe, from United States, and so on. And I know you are a very strong advocate of investing in emerging markets. And actually, some people are classifying Russian market as emerging market, right? But why do you? But why? It's so difficult to find any economic outlook about Russia, Russian economics, investments in Russia. How do you explain that?
How do I explain the lack of information? Is that?
Especially in Western media.
I don't know. I mean, you don't get a lot of coverage of the foreign markets. I mean, I think the focus is mainly on U.S. stocks. I mean, they talk about Europe a lot, and but they don't they don't necessarily bring up countries in particular, unless maybe it's one of the countries that's having a sovereign debt problem. So I don't know. I mean, there's probably not a lot of Americans who own Russian stocks. We have very little money over there. I mean, at one point, I did have some money long time ago in some of the Russian GDRs or ADRs for some of the oil companies that were there, and they got really cheap, if you recall, back in 1999, 2000, 2001. And so, we were buying some of them back then, and I had some personally and made some money trading those stocks, but I really haven't been active in the Russian market for years and years. So it's just not something that I've invested a lot in myself either. So, but I know that there are a lot of resources there. There's certainly a lot of energy there, and there are certain sectors that. But I've tried to get my exposure to those areas in other countries. At least, I mean, I did it briefly back then, but I haven't been active recently.
Okay, Peter, and one more point. When I thought about some gold investments, I noticed that people are kind of nervous about gold price that can fall against dollar, right? So people think that is a risk, right? And when you compare gold price against ruble, it's Russian currency, okay? It's getting even more interesting probably, because Russian government has no incentive to have a strong ruble, because they are selling some resources abroad for dollars or for euro, and they're getting some income and taxes in rubles, so they would like to have more rubles and taxes. And that's why they want to have a weaker currency. And at the same time, Russian banks are almost all too big to fail, okay? So they're playing the same playbook as American politicians.
Yeah, well, you've got the same problem there in Russia is a lot of countries where, you have a competitive devaluation race to the bottom, but meanwhile, Russia is accumulating enormous foreign exchange reserves as a result of that foolish policy. But yeah, I mean, Russians, there are a lot of reasons why Russians should buy gold. And, even though the price of gold can drop, $50 or $100, I mean, even if gold prices goes down $100 in one day, which would be a huge move, right? From this level, that's a 5% drop, right? That's like a $20 stock dropping $1. I mean, that happens all the time. Yet for some reason, because gold might drop 5% in one day, it's so risky and people should avoid it. I think overall the volatility in gold is less than the volatility in a typical S&P 500 stock. Yet people would not say that, a stock is too risky for people because it might drop 5% or 2 or 3% in a given day. So I think there's less volatility in gold. Now, there's more volatility in gold than a money market, than cash, because nothing could be volatile against itself. But if you look at how much purchasing power paper currencies lose relative to gold on an annualized basis, I think it's far riskier to store your savings in any of the fiat currencies, but particularly, let's say, the U.S. dollar, than storing it in gold. I mean, people who have been holding on to gold, yes, there's been more volatility, but look at how much better off they are. I mean, people who started buying gold 10, 12 years ago when it was $300 an ounce and now it's $1,900 an ounce, think of the growth in the purchasing power that they have relative to people who stuck with the less volatile money market fund. But anyway, hey, thanks for your call, and I appreciate your listening, and spread the word. We need to get more fans of the Peter Schiff Show in Russia. Anyway, next up is Ray calling from Dearborn, Michigan. Ray, you're on the show.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think Ron Paul needs like a gimmick. You know, he should like pull out a rubber chicken or something and throw it at a candidate and say, "We already have a chicken in the White House," or pull some kind of stunt like that, and let's see them ignore that.
No, I don't want him to get attention for that. I want attention to be paid to Ron Paul because of who he is and what he stands for and his knowledge. Let's have some more talk about his investment portfolio that is on fire, obviously, today with the record high in gold prices and the breakout, or rather the record high in gold stocks, which, of course, are pretty much all Ron Paul owns. How about somebody asking him in one of these debates, hey, you made a killing in the stock market. How did you know that gold stocks were going to do so well? That'd be a good question for Ron Paul, and let him answer it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think he's too intelligent. I mean, if you see, Sarah Palin, I see Russia from my porch and how, she ran up the mainstream. I remember Ross Perot with his charts and graphs, and he really explained it down. I think Ron Paul talks over the people's head. I don't even think most people understand that the Federal Reserve is not part of the government. I mean, his fans certainly.
Yeah, but, he's a lot of people. And, one of the best things about Ron Paul's message is it's resonating with the young. It's resonating on college campuses, and that is supposed to be the bastion of the left. After all, a lot of people make the evolution from being a socialist or left-winger to a conservative or libertarian as they get older. I mean, there was an old saying, right? If you're not a liberal by the time you're 22, you don't have a heart. But if you're not a conservative by the time you're 28, you don't have a head. And so most people make that progression. It's just that Ron Paul is actually getting people who are young when they would normally be idealistically liberal and showing them a better way. And, yes, I guess Rick Perry did the same thing. Rick Perry evolved and learned from his mistakes and went from being an Al Gore supporter to a Republican. The problem is he was supporting Al Gore at a much higher age. I guess he was in his 30s or so. I'm not sure how old Rick Perry is today, but in 1988, that was a time where he should have already learned enough to have rejected liberalism. So the question is, what does he really stand for? But there is no question as to what Ron Paul stands for. When he was supporting Ronald Reagan in 1976, when he challenged sitting President Gerald Ford, I mean, everybody thought Ronald Reagan was nuts back then in the mainstream. They thought he had no chance. Yet Ron Paul was supporting him because ideologically they were soulmates. And Ron Paul was on board with the Reagan philosophy and the Reagan revolution before it was popular. And the problem was he was frustrated by the fact that the Reagan revolution actually failed to materialize as far as government spending reductions. All of the promised cuts and reductions never happened. And he was at least principled enough to acknowledge that. And he left the Republican Party out of frustration. And I think he came back out of frustration because he tried to make a difference as a libertarian and couldn't, so went back to the only party where he thought he had a chance of helping, and that was in the Republican Party. And he has helped. He has definitely changed the tenor of the debate. He is leading the debate as far as the rhetoric and the issues, whether the press wants to give him credit or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. I hear that. I just have one more comment for you. It's Krugman. I saw the other day he had some article epiphany at 4:30 in the morning. So he is losing sleep, and he made some bizarre connection. I can't even repeat it because I didn't understand his reasoning about why gold's going up in the Keynesian model. There was some logic to his, but it was at 4:30 in the morning. He couldn't sleep.
And what was it? What was his rationale now? Because before he actually wrote an article blaming it on Glenn Beck. Said that gold was only rising because Glenn Beck was touting it, as if Glenn has that much power. But what was his epiphany? What was his rationale to explain why the gold price is going up?
Oh, I wish I had it on it's on the tip of my tongue, but there's some ridiculous.
Because I think I meant to read that article. Someone sent it to me, and I think I just it slipped my mind and I didn't read it. But yeah, I'm sure the reason he's not attributing to it is because of the bad policies that they're pursuing. He probably thinks it's some kind of irrational bubble that's going to burst. Everybody wants to say that gold's going up, but they don't want to acknowledge the reason why. And it's because that money is being destroyed. Paper money is losing value all over the world because our whole fiat system is breaking down. It doesn't work. And the proof is that all the countries that are now responsible are feeling pressure to be just as reckless. So interest rates are too low all around the world. Too much money is being printed all around the world. Nobody can get a real rate of return. And so, people are going to slowly but surely rediscover gold. This is the time. It's going to happen, in my opinion. And I think the longer people wait to buy gold, the more expensive it's going to be. And, of course, the last person who buys will end up paying the highest price of all. So you don't want to be the last person on your block to own gold. But eventually, everybody's going to own it. The question is, how long will they wait, and how much wealth will they lose before they buy?
Exactly. Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, and appreciate your calling in. Next up, from Orange County, California, Rob. Welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, Peter. I just wanted to talk about the debates. I've got them on my DVR right now. I just wanted to say I thought Ron Paul did a great job. I think he's starting to do a really good job against the demagoguing with talking about feeding hungry mouths, and he's throwing it right back at him. And I'd like to, you comment on how he should point out how he called the tech bubble, the housing bubble. I would have liked to see him, maybe during the minimum wage question, throw that back at him. But I think he could have maybe thrown that.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned that he'd like to get rid of the minimum wage, and I'd like to get more follow-up on him just saying that the minimum wage is destroying jobs. It's not that I want people to be exploited. I want people to have opportunity, and the minimum wage law denies people opportunity, particularly those who need it the most. Anyway, hey, we're up against the break. If you want to stick around over the break, that's fine. Hey, we have some open lines. If you want to call up, 855-4SHIFT. 855-4SHIFT is the number to call if you want to get squeezed in to the final segment coming up after this break. So don't go away.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million.
Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back talking with Rob over at Orange County. Rob, you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, go ahead. We got a full board now. We got a lot of calls since I mentioned that we had some open lines.
Right.
But go ahead.
I'll make it quick then. The other points I wanted to make about him, I thought he was a little vague about why he left the party with Reagan. I wish he would have been a little bit more concise. And also, he let Rick Perry dodge the question on Hillary Care. They completely changed it. He should have went back at him.
Yeah, he went on a defensive about the Ronald Reagan remark. You don't have a lot of time, but I think he did a good job of addressing the fact that that he was an early supporter of Ronald Reagan, but he didn't get to throw it back at Perry because his support of Al Gore really didn't even come up.
Yeah. Yeah,
but I think it's a great commercial. I think the commercial that he ran is gonna put a dent for a lot of people who didn't even watch the debates. But all they're going to do is they're going to see this commercial and they're going to see that Rick Perry supported Al Gore and that Ron Paul was an early supporter of Ronald Reagan. I think that's going to pick up some votes among the mainstream Republicans who idealize Ronald Reagan and who hate Al Gore. So.
Yeah, these guys, they stick at Rick Perry and Mitt Romney actually remind me of Al Gore, how fake they are. They have these pre-canned speeches, and they go off, and Ron Paul is speaking from the heart.
Yeah, but look, at least Rick Perry called a spade on Social Security. He said it was a Ponzi scheme. He didn't back down. You got to respect that.
Yeah, but, I mean, is he going to do it, though? Ron Paul will. He's shown that he's going to change things, but has Rick Perry done? I mean, he's thrown government in Texas.
Yeah,
right?
well, and at the same time, he said that the people who are currently getting Social Security are not going to have any cuts. So, how are you going to let the young people off the hook if you're not going to reduce benefits for the people who are currently receiving them? So if you're going to maintain the benefits, then you got to keep screwing the young people. So, you got to be honest about the whole thing. Yes, if you want to acknowledge that the 20 and 30-year-olds are really getting screwed on this deal, the only way to let them off the hook is to lower their taxes. And if you lower their taxes, well, that means you got to reduce the benefits on the other side of the transaction. There's just no two ways about it.
Do you ever talk to Ron Paul about it? Because the way you articulate it, it's very quick and brief. Do you ever talk to him about maybe using the same kind of language as you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some discussions with him, but of course, it's when you're in a debate, you don't have you get a very, very short window to speak. I got a 2-hour radio show, so I can fully address the points. And of course, I participated in one debate. I think it might still be on the internet if you look at it. When I ran, I mean, there was one big one that was televised, and you have all the lights and a big crowd. And so, sometimes you don't think as quickly on your feet when you're in the setting of a debate. So it's easy to Monday morning quarterback somebody else when they're having to play the game real time. But yeah, I talked to him and I've given him some of my lines, and if he uses them. But we pretty much think the same way on most issues. So.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing is I think with the 10-cent gas, the 10-cent silver. I thought that was great.
Yeah, he brought that up.
But what about? I mean, there's people maybe that don't understand what he's talking about because
they didn't get it. I would have. Yeah, what Ron Paul? Yeah, when he brings that up, he has to say that gas prices haven't gone up. See, the proper way to explain it is, look, everybody thinks the price of gas has gone up. It hasn't. You can buy a gallon of gas for a dime. That's cheaper than it was in 1950. Gas prices have come down due to technology and efficiencies. The problem is American public has been denied the benefits of cheap gas because we've been on a fiat standard. We've allowed the Federal Reserve to destroy the value of the dollar, and so now you need $4 to buy 1 gallon, but with real money, you can still take a silver dime that we all had in our pockets as late as 1964. You can take one of those silver dimes and buy a gallon of gas. That's the point he has to make, and that if it wasn't for all the inflation that is created, gasoline would cost a dime, not $4.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for the call. Next up is Bernard calling from Dallas, Texas. Texas, of course, the home of both Rick Perry and Ron Paul. Bernard, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I love that SmackDown yesterday. It was great. I want to ask you a two-part question. First, what do you think about Ron Paul's new direction? I've never seen him really attack anybody. You think that'll turn people off? I actually been rooting for him to do it for a long time, since 08, since they've been in
No, because I think attacking the front runners is the only way he's going to get any attention. And, of course, he's got to get the votes. He's got to get some of the Rick Perry people. He's got to get some of the Mitt Romney people, because that's where all the support are. I mean, what's the point of attacking a candidate who's at 2 or 3% in the polls? I mean, what's the most? You get all their supporters, and it's still not going to mean much. And, of course, you're not going to get all of them. So you got to go after the big guys. It's like Willie Sutton. Why are you robbing the banks? That's where the money is, right? So the votes are with Rick Perry and with Mitt Romney. And so Ron Paul's got to come after those guys, and he's doing it, and it's good.
Some of his appeal was due to his integrity and the fact that he didn't do those types of things. He was more of an ideological. Well, he did attack his record. But
I don't think he sacrifices integrity by rightly criticizing some of the other candidates in the race. I really don't.
It was a little strange, just out of his character, but I liked it a lot. He should do a lot more. My second part is I recently came into a piece of change, like $100,000, and I was wondering, how do I keep it? How do I keep it, or how do I invest it? Because I'm used to having a large amount of money, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, call up Euro Pacific Capital. Talk to one of my brokers. They'll give you some advice. We're running out of time. But, negative advertisement happens because it works. I ended up getting a lot of media. The only media attention I got when I ran for Senate was my ad where Linda McMahon is kicking this guy in the groin. And I ended up with a surge in the polls, probably because of that negative ad. So the negative ads work, and so hopefully they'll work for Ron Paul. Anyway, that's it for today's show. We will be back again tomorrow with another 2 hours of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.
Would you mind a reflecting sign? Just let it shine within your mind.
The Peter Schiff Show.
The color